Okay. Hello, hello. Welcome in. My name is EC, and we are going to be talking about computers and the history of computers today. If you've never jumped in on one of my lives before, hi, nice to meet you. I like to have respectful conversations about nuanced topics, and it can range from kind of anything. So, today we are talking the history of computers and computation and how that also changed culture, pop culture, major inventions, all these other things that were affected by the development of computers. Hi, Aqua! You are the first. Yay! Congratulations! Oh my gosh, you're so fast. You're so fast. I hadn't even started the stream and you were on. Hi, Shadow. Hello, hello. This is a requested topic. It was actually Shadow's request to look into this, and I hear that Shadow has been in the weeds of discovering all of the details about this. So if there's anything I miss out on, Shadow, please correct me or let me know. But yes. Akka says, I promise not to derail. You're supposed to be able to have conversations and fun discourse. That's the point. It's not derailment. It's exploring things that feel relevant. So, Ah. But yes. Okay, so computers are, man. Um. Oof. Okay, so computation in of itself is an extraordinarily old thing. Using technology and building machines to help us compute numerical needs is extraordinarily old. The first appearance of a machine built to help humans compute was actually in 2400 BC Mesopotamia, which was then further refined in China, and from there made its way to Western spaces and developed even further. So it has got a very long history. Now, this original machine was called an abacus. An abacus is essentially it's a frame that has two or more wires or strings tied across it this way with beads on those strings. And the beads represent various groupings of numbers, and they can help people compute large calculations quickly. They're most useful for addition and subtraction, but you can also multiply and divide on them if you're good at using them. But that is definitely just the beginning. Oh my gosh. Shadow's like, I didn't go that far back. That's fair. That's very fair. I think what I realized when I was looking into this is that it is pretty hard to deconstruct, or I should say, to separate the history and development of computers from the development of calculation, and using machines to help us calculate large groups of numbers. Because even though it sounds weird, computers are massive glorified calculators, and everything about what we're experiencing on them can technically be reduced. I don't even like using that word, but can be defined as a calculation of numbers to produce various things. So that can be images, that can be videos, that can be it's a method of producing or transmitting some kind of message from one space to another space, even if that is within the computer, from your computer to your screen, and it is transforming those messages into a form that is, I guess you could say, more amenable to the average person, especially if they themselves are not particularly interested in trying to learn how to read code. So that's fair. Shadow says that my rabbit hole began in the 1800s up to modern electronics. Yeah, because that's when what we understand as actual, like, computers in the form of programming and computation that were more directly related to how computers formed was in that era, that in that time period. But yes, hey Geek, hello, hello. Okay, go, hello, hello. Gecko says not everything, but most. It's better to separate them because some operations like storage can't be reduced to calculation in its important operation. You're very right, Gecko. So is it Geeko or Gecko? Let me know. Also, storage was actually one of the major hurdles that allowed computers to transform from being ton plus massive machines to what they are today. It was the ability of a computer to store commands and then repeat those stored commands when directed that absolutely changed what computers became. Without that ability, which was actually developed by a like mathematic prodigy, what was his name? Oh my god, wait, hold up. I have all of this written down. This is silly. I have to go through my notes. Oh, what was his name? Why can't I find it? He made the and oh my god, okay, hold up. I have to check. Because this is very relevant. Computer. And then he was a Polish, no, he was from Hungary. Oh, I love that. That's so good. Okay. And don't worry, so it's a play on geek or gecko. So a geeko or gecko. So you could do both. Okay. I will go with whatever comes out of my mouth next. And don't worry about that at all. I'm grateful that you have time to jump in at all. So thank you so much for being here. I did not realize how hard it is to find YouTube live streams if you're not on shorts. And I realized that my whole setup is not formatted for shorts. So I am absolutely amazed that anybody has been able to find my live streams at all. So thank you for being here. Oh my gosh. And Shadow says, oh, I should show you my old 2011 MacBook and just how intricate it is. Yeah, I bet. Like, it's absolutely incredible to me how much computers have changed in such a short amount of time and how much has been affected by computer development. So let me see. I need to find this person's name because it is important. Okay. Goldstein. John von Neumann. There we go. John von Neumann. He'd also he was the one who developed the forms that, or the innovation that allowed computers to store commands. And his wife actually was extraordinarily instrumental in that. And it's one thing that is very common in the development of most scientific discoveries is the wives of many people credited with certain developments were instrumental to their ability to help with these breakthroughs, or even maybe have made those breakthroughs themselves, and their husbands, depending on the era, passed them off as their own. But this is one of the few moments where that actually was not happening, where John von Neumann absolutely credited his wife, which was great. And then, oh my gosh, Aqua! Can't tell people. Aqua says, chat, she's got me locked in a basement to mod for her. Please, if you like her content, share. Every share gets me a snack. I'm kidding. I'm absolutely kidding. Aqua is not in a basement. I don't know if you're in a basement, but you are not. I don't have a basement. So ha. Still. Oh my gosh. Okay. So let's kind of go to the um early structures of what led to the computer. It started out, I'm going to do a, try and do, I know I always say, I'm going to do a quick timeline. I'm going to do a quick synopsis. I'm going to try and do a quick timeline of the general development of computers. And then I want to also discuss on a social level what changed about our societies due to the proliferation of computers, the ability of many more people to access them that led to where we are today. So we start in 2400 BC in Mesopotamia. And then that is when the first abacus is recorded to have been used. And from there, it is again refined in China. And then from there, it travels its way to European countries and Aqua. I am wearing my shirt. God is busy. Can I help you? This feels appropriate. This feels like the right time to take on a bit. So, okay. So we start in Mesopotamia, move to China, and then filter our way through to to like Europe, Western Europe. One thing that is really interesting is that the development of numerical processing was an absolute necessity for being able to eventually create machines that could translate non-numerical experiences and concepts into a numerical language for a computer to process and recreate. And that is a really important component of computation in general with when it comes from using numbers as a representation of either financial concepts or representations of specific items to becoming representations of non-specific, more abstract concepts utilized through a machine. So Shadow says, it's crazy to think about how entire games used to fit into just megabytes. Now some games take 100 plus gigabytes. Yes, that is true. There's a big change to how complicated and layered many ways of storage essentially has been for allowing further development when it comes to computing and things that feel like science fiction. But this is going to be a big part of our conversation. Is going to be about how science fiction was both in like the development of certain concepts related to science fiction, also were reflected in media and then inspired inventors to try and make those things real. But we're gonna get to that. Okay, so quick timeline. We went from we've kind of moved forward to about the 1600s, but it's, I guess you say 1700s. I'm never sure. This is silly, but I'm never sure if it's 1700s when you're referring backwards or if it's 1600s when you're referring to 1600 to 70. I don't know. I'm so sorry. This is silly. I should know these things. Okay, so technically, the very first mechanical calculators was a calculating clock that was built in 1623 by William Shecard. I hope I said that right. Shecard? Yes. But that also inspired Blaise Pascal in 1642, who invented the Pascaline, which was something capable, again, of a mechanical calculator capable of addition and subtraction. And then that in turn inspired Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. I'm so sorry. I am butchering these names. I apologize. In 1673, to create the stepped reckoner, which could also multiply and divide. Now, what's interesting is that it sounds like it's a recreation of the same thing again and again. But the truth of the matter is, like, when you start with the abacus, you have a like beads on a string, a piece of wood, a wire that are being moved across one side to the other as representations of a calculation. But with each further development on a mechanical level, you have more defined and separate opportunities to actually do those calculations so that the human is not the one doing them on behalf and simply using the abacus as an external physical method of what is going on in their heads. So, let me see. Hey, Brant! Hello, hello! 1900s is 20th century. Oh. 1700s would mean the year is 17 something. The 17th century means 1600. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Aqua, you're very right. Aqua says this is one of those times where wording is hard, but unfortunately really important. 110%. Yes. Yes. Oh my gosh. Okay, so 17th century means 1600s. I am now realizing all of the times that I have said that incredibly incorrectly, so I apologize for all of those. But yes, the 17th century is the 1600s, 18th is 1700. Okay. Got it now. Also, will you all let me know if the music is too loud or distracting? I have on a Cowboy Bebop playlist, and it's cute, but also, if it is annoying, please let me know. Okay, so we're going going forward a little bit. So what these items did, these developments in machine, I guess innovation, mechanical innovation, did is they created an external source from a person's mind to represent larger calculations that previously would have had to be written out using the language of math, and instead created a physical method of processing those calculations that was, again, external to your mind or without the need for pages and pages of calculations, or to help you with your pages of calculations. And ultimately, it simply allowed for finer explorations, deeper explorations into larger quantitative questions. And that is important because without that foundation, the development of what we're now used to into computers that we're used to now wouldn't have been possible. It was basically the baby steps, the walking towards where we are now. Hi, Bobby Christine. Hello. Hello. Hi. Yay. This is awesome. I'm so excited. I'm having like the best early birthday present. Also, by the way, everyone, tomorrow is my birthday. So happy, I guess, early birthday to me. Oh, that feels weird to say. But anyways, I'm so glad that I got to connect with you all today, which is nice. Gives me a little mini birthday party in chat. And I think it's hilarious that we're talking about math because I have dyscalculia, so yeah, here we are. Oh my gosh. And then, oh, is that why programmers like to start counting from 0? Is this a math joke I don't understand, or is this some legitimate commentary? I'm so sorry. Oh, it's because of the, okay, so Aqua's also exploring deeper the, thank you, Kiko, thank you, thank you. Thank you, Aqua, thank you. Thank you, Chloe Christine. Okay, birthday party. But let's see. So Aqua's saying the reason for 17th century meaning 1600s is because the first century is 1 BCE to 99 BCE and counting is stupid. Okay. Fair. And that's why you start from 0. Now I understand. Okay, thank you. I will also say when it came to BCE and AD, that did always confuse me a little bit, because I know one's like supposed to be before Christ and one's supposed to be after, but I'm not sure what the D stands for. I might also be wrong. Very possible. Okay, so we're moving on. We kind of okay, so we talked about like how there's like this development of external machines to help humans calculate larger sets of quantitative questions, and that led to Charles Babbage, who is often considered the father of the computer. Now, here's the really interesting thing about computers. There is no one singular person you can point to as being the creator of a computer, because it was a slow development over centuries, and so many people developed major components to it. It's not like, because again, it is a multifaceted machine that required a lot of fine tuning in order to operate. It took many, many years and a lot of technological innovation to explore these concepts and develop them into something that was usable and workable. And I think in our modern day and age, it can feel, because computers are so integrated to everything that we do in life, it can feel that computers were inevitable. Like, how would we have developed at all without them? And I think it would be an interesting thought experiment to wonder what the world would be like if we didn't have computers, if we had never developed them in the way that they did develop. But that could be I guess a exploratory thought experiment for a different stream. But okay, so this is where we're getting to the 1830s to the 1870s. Charles Babbage worked on this for almost the entirety of his adult life. Is the analytical engine, which was a mechanical computer that he used to, it actually never was finished, but it was something that created the early core structures of what all computers use today, which is the concept of a CPU, the idea of something like a memory unit. And what he would do is he would use punch cards, where a machine would calculate various queries and use paper and basically hole punch in different areas of a page to represent different responses. And this ultimately led to the development of first programming. Now, what's interesting is that you would have thought that if Charles Babbage had been able to develop this component, that perhaps he would, especially because he spent like 30s to the 1830s to 1870s, he had spent so many years of his life exploring this, that perhaps there would have been another major development. It doesn't perhaps sound like a major development to us in our modern day and age, but at the time that he was creating these things, it was absolutely like just such an odd thing to be exploring. Bye, Shadow. We'll see you soon. But a huge component of this era as well was Ada Lovelace, who is widely considered to be the very first programmer. And she was a collaborator of Babbage, and she wrote a lot of notes on the analytical engine. A lot of also, I think, are ideas about kind of certain cultural trends, like steampunk, for example, come from this era of the Industrial Revolution, which was happening at a similar time period, where you have a lot of people shifting how the entirety of their worlds work from being agriculturally based to being factory based. You have a huge swath of the population who had in the feudal systems been serfs being pushed off of their land and being pushed into factories and cities due to private ownership. And that is actually a concept that I get into a lot more on the video that I'm still working on. It takes so much time. Gosh, why? But onto the video that I'm doing and working on right now that actually explores commerce, capitalism, and the history of money. And you will be able to, I'll leave that conversation for that, because that was a lot of research. I have learned things, too many things. You can't learn too many things, but either way, there was an absolute major cultural shift that was happening in this same era. And you do actually, I think a lot of how we think about computation, computers changing the world, is very much focused through our modern lens. Maybe the earliest we might think of is the 1950s. But the development of being able to calculate large amounts of numbers could be a huge component towards the development of things like the Industrial Revolution, assembly line factory work, and so many major changes that took place, as well as the ability to calculate large sums of money that previously weren't as necessary because people used to have wealth focused through the concept of land versus the concept of individual coins or paper bills or things like that. Not that they weren't there before, but just that generally the ways that people would do calculations, even large scale ones, were not always focused on completely abstract ideas unless they were getting into more philosophical or intense, more intensely scientific mathematical components. So basically the average person, and even in terms of like kind of large scale government processing, would probably not need to be doing like the same level of intense computation that you do when you're working with money and with large amounts of money. That is why having things like a analytical engine and programming is so incredibly important and useful for the development of other major shifts in society. So basically, computerized items, computerized machines have been affecting the way that our world has developed for so long. I don't even know how often, like, I'm sure there are other people who have made this connection, but I don't know how often I've seen conversations exploring how the calculator and essentially more and more intense, more developed calculators had such a direct effect on the development of other components of life. And at the same time, you also are seeing a development of something else, and that was the exploration of using, well, I guess light and frequency to develop what we now have as phone lines, radio waves, radio towers, communication over long distances through without using letters or telegrams, even the very difficult process of what it took to figure out what was actually happening inside light bulbs, and the further understanding of how our entire universe is made out of atoms and matter. It basically, the deeper understandings of science were and concepts related to what made our world were necessary for the development of ultimately computerized systems, computerized machines, and at the same time had a massive pop culture effect and social effect. There was, every time there's massive technological innovation, that leads to major social changes. There is definitely, I think, a through line between the downfall of feudalism and the uptick of capitalism. Yes, Brent, exactly. Brent's talking about electricity and the battle between Edison and Tesla. 100% yes. And as well, the other people who Edison stole his ideas from, who were people who worked in his lab who did not get the credit for the developments and inventions that they made. That was pretty common too with Edison. So yeah, so there's at the same time that you have these developments with computational machines like the analytical engine, and then of course the development and the utilization of punch cards to help calculate larger quantitative sets of data, and the development of some of the very first computer programming languages using analytical, not analytical, abstract mathematical concepts, then you actually see how that's directly transferred from that to using things that Edison and Tesla were developing to form what became our modern computers. So punch cards were a really big really big shift for a lot of people when it came to building on Babbage's original invention with the analytical engine. So then you have Herman Hollerith in 1890, only 20 years after Babbage kind of stopped with his machine. He actually used an electromechanical machine using punch cards to tabulate US Census data to reduce the processing time. So a lot of these developments happened out of pure necessity. The original, I think it was a Pascaline, was created by Blaise Pascal. I think it was also to help with taxes because his father was a tax collector. I might have that wrong, but there was definitely a tax collector whose desire to help his family member calculate the taxes that he had to process actually led to one of these major shifts, which is kind of wild. It's like census data and taxes is why you can play cat videos on a phone today. Like, what? But here we are. And then actually one thing that's really interesting is Herman Hollerith. He used the machines that he made, especially using punch cards, to build IBM, which was the they're called International Business Machines. It was actually the first and major computer company in the world. And they had the biggest chokehold on the industry until the mid-80s, which is wild when you think that Herman Hollerith was doing this in the 1890s and he was around that long. That's a long time. But yes, so there's multiple different phases of computer development, and I think they're called generations. So you have the vacuum tube generation, which was was directly developed because of the development of light bulbs and the exploration that oh, sorry, I was missing out on some comments. Let me check in on this. Ah, I love that gecko. Al-Khwarizmi, which is known in West by Algorithmos, was the first to write a book with detailed steps so anyone can solve equations later. And computer programming adopted that to write steps with a machine. Yes. And the census is super important, and most people don't know how much money it accounts for. That's true, Brant. Yes. And then Gecko also says that was also from necessity. The Abbasid Caliph requested the book for merchants in Baghdad, which was a big market at the time. And Brant's also talking about how the census moves billions from communities and through communities. That's true. Census is one of those interesting components of our culture that I don't know how often I've ever questioned its existence, but I've also don't know how many times I have seen or really interacted with information that made it clear how much the census affects our communities, and how, even though it's really terrifying, a lot of people will lie on censuses when reporting household data in order to avoid legal repercussions if they are anyone who's undocumented in those homes. And that creates further difficulties for certain communities because of the fear that a census worker who might be asking questions or a census information might be used against people in those communities. So yeah, censuses are actually significantly more important, but I don't remember the last time. When was the last time a census happened on a large scale in the US? I'm sure it's happened in my lifetime. I just can't recall a single time. But yeah, they do a lot to affect the districting of finances in each community. Because it's not just our tax data, it's our census data as well. And as a result, I do think a lot of times to try and compensate for getting accurate information, because censuses are timely. They are a very, very intense way to gather data about different communities. It was all the, oh my God, it was 2020? It's every 10 years. Oh, what? I don't remember filling anything out for the 2020 census. How did I miss that? Uh-oh. So the next one is in 2030. Okay. Ow. I hope that I didn't accidentally miss something important then. I probably did, but okay. So we're back to the first generation of computerized innovation. Yeah, Brant's talking about how being, unhoused communities are a really big issue for the census as well. That's very true. It's very hard to accurately represent the needs of unhoused communities on a census data because it is based on residential spaces and business spaces, basically housed spaces. Hugo says I'm not counted in the US population. Oh. Uh-oh. I'm not in the census. I don't know. I don't know. I guess I don't know how I will find that out, but there we are. I'll have to see how I can look into this later because I am now very curious. Oh, Brant says they did a lot of estimating because it was COVID. That makes sense. What's also interesting is I would imagine that with modern technology, there would be a possibility of a different form of collecting data, but processing data is also still a intense process when you have that much data to process. And I also, recognizing how rare it is for different components of the government to actually fund the areas that might have the most use for the communities they're serving. I could imagine that it's probably not funded very well. But okay, so at the same time that the development of essentially calculators and calculating machines is happening, there's also this development with frequency sound and the desire to be able to transmit what we see and hear from one space to another, and the exploration of doing that using radio waves, using electricity. And so circuitry also is developing at the same time. You start seeing areas that are, especially because of the Industrial Revolution, that are switching from traditional methods of using light and power to new methods using electricity. And it also had a radical effect on the development of computers because a lot of early light bulbs were, because of the ways that protons and neutrons and electrons were bouncing within the filaments of the, this is a massive simplification by the way, but were bouncing within the light bulb filaments. Certain sides were getting burned, and so different creators or different inventors were trying to find alternative methods to ensure a more efficient method of building a light bulb that would be able to maintain light and not burn the filament so quickly. And so they ended up eventually on something called vacuum tubes, and vacuum tubes were super, super useful for computerized machines. So what ended up happening is they were using the combination of circuitry from the development of restructuring essentially huge areas of the world with electrical lighting and other forms of structuring our societal, what do you call that? But changing a lot about how all areas of how lighting worked within our society, from cars to household machines to large scale lighting systems within cities and eventually towns, and even more as that developed and refined, that also, of course, then massively changed how computers could be built. And so, using the combination of circuitry and electricity, the kind of early first generation of what we definitely recognize as computers started, and it used a lot of heat, it used a lot of power, because these massive machines were creating and using like the first kind of programming languages, like Ada Lovelace's original language, um, to communicate mass amounts of information and compute those concepts with entirely through the concept of, and this is again a massive simplification, but like a mechanized brain. And so there was a desire to create a fully electronic and digital computer, which up until that point had just not been possible. So it took until 1945 to actually build a computer that was a fully like functioning digital computer that used electricity to communicate and to calculate. And there were, of course, also, Alan Turing. There was that movie about Alan Turing. Hi, Shadow. Hello, hello. There's that movie about Alan Turing where, he's using a computerized machine to calculate and break the Enigma code in the middle of the war with World War II. And his team is working to do that. And there are all these high-level mathematicians who are having to utilize, yes, war was always a big part of it. And that's the thing with every time there is a massive technological innovation, a lot of time, I'm saying every time, a lot of times when there are massive technological innovations, those innovations are funded the best in times of war, and there is a significant focus on exploring concepts that might otherwise be seen as less than necessary on average. So you definitely see massive amounts of technological innovation, and World War II in of itself was also a huge turning point on a technological level for the entirety of the world, because you also have, earlier I talked about John von Neumann, and he had actually been recruited for the Manhattan Project. He is a so it's you have like all of these different scientists and mathematicians and thinkers coming together for the goal of creating war machines or strategizing for war-related issues in ways that they wouldn't necessarily be gathered to solve major other world crises like world hunger or other things that could like restructuring economic systems to make them more safe for the entirety of the world versus certain areas of it. And so you have these definitely times of war become these instigators for major technological change, and you absolutely see that in the history of computers. Yes, Brent is very right. Brent says the massive government money really helps. And yes, absolutely, 110%. That's the thing, is when the money is pushed towards that innovation, innovation has a lot easier time happening because people are able to focus on it. And that might be a commentary on the general concept of creation as it is, when a person doesn't have to, or a group of people who are doing things that might seem abstract, are able to focus the entirety of their attention on it and are funded and supported and can ensure the safety and progress of healthful progress of their life while they do that, then innovation is a lot easier. But if people are also are attempting to innovate while also trying to ensure they have a roof over their heads, have are able to hold a job, it makes it a lot harder when it doesn't get to be your priority. So That is that is an I think an unintended commentary from that, but that is very much something that I could not ignore saying. All right, so we're moving on to the second generation, which happened in the 50s and the 60s, and it was actually the development of transistors. Transistors, which were invented in 1947, and they actually ended up replacing vacuum tubes because vacuum tubes were very, very hot. They were very power intensive. And in Philadelphia, where there was the biggest, it was called the ENIAC, the one that was made in 1945, the large scale electrical digital computer system. It was huge. It actually took up a huge amount of room, and it was multiple tons of essentially these giant switchboards. And you had these operators who had to 24/7 be rotated in shifts to change out tubes and move wires and cords and other things in order to ensure that the machine was able to keep operating. And the ultimate amount of calculations that I think the ENIAC was able to output were, in comparison to the amount of work that it took, um, maybe not the most impressive. But the big part of that was because of the lack of the ENIAC to store information. You could input a command to the ENIAC, but it could not hold on to that command and then move on to or repeat that command and redo the same thing. You would have to consistently input any command that you wanted. And that was a huge, huge, huge difficulty. But that's where John von Neumann came in and started developing some of the earlier and ultimately copied versions of storage that did radically change how computers worked. You add on to that the development of using transistors like you would in a radio versus a vacuum tube that was from the early eras of circuitry and lighting exploration, and you have a new machine. So yes, actually, Gico's talking about how programming bugs were called bugs because at the time computers were so big that bugs would get stuck and ruin the circuitry, and someone had to debug it. Yes, there was actually a woman was the first person who came up with that term. And it was because there was a dead moth that was caught in one of the machines that she was working on, and she had to go and try and fish it out. It was a huge endeavor, and she came up with the term computer bug and also debugging. Hi, gal. Hello, hello. How are you? And thank you, thank you, thank you. I forget that I guess I stylistically this is pretty on the nose for me, but I also haven't been dressing like this as much recently, so I forget that YouTube does not know this is not seeing me this way yet. So it's nice to see you. How are you? Hello, hello. We're talking about the history of computers, and we're also going to explore a little bit about the way that the development of computers, especially as we know them today, how they changed society and pop culture and other components of our world. And right now we're going through a timeline of a very fast, I'm trying to do a fast timeline. I know it's not fast. I'm trying to do a fast timeline of the development of computers. So right now we're in the 1950s and the 60s. We just kind of identified how there was a major development with storage in computer systems, because at that point they were just giant calculators in a glorified way. And they had been very much influenced by the development of circuitry and the development of things like light bulbs and electrical systems. But with the switching of computerized machines from vacuum tubes to transistors, and also the utilization of electricity as the method of communication for how information was processed within the computer, or how it was traveled within the computer, what powered the computer. Um, there was a massive change in how a computer could be used. They were really, really loud because you could hear there was a clicking and clacking every time that a computer had to process. Um, and there's something I haven't really discussed yet, and that is what computers were actually doing while processing. And I will in just a sec. We're going to get to it. So the transistors, actually, interestingly, were created by at Bell Labs in 1947. And that actually was a major shift, again, for the development of computers. But what it did is it transformed computers from being these multi-ton, like floor, like huge machines. They did. Brandt says they helped us get to the moon. That is true. That is true. It's very true. In the 60s, it would not have been possible without the development of computerized processing, because of the types of calculations that a person has to make when it comes to any kind of architectural or movement-based need. So if you're going to be building a bridge, or if you're going to be trying to calculate the trajectory of a rocket going into space and the probability of a human being able to survive, and the types of things that a human would need to be able to survive, as well as the kind of more abstract mathematical concepts necessary to ideate what the atmosphere might be like. Like, what would a human be encountering if they traveled from the ground all the way up, and how quickly could they survive that? How much could they withstand? All of that is in high level calculations, high level math that you have to do, and the computers helped a lot with that calculation and that process. But because of the shift from vacuum tubes to transistors, the reason I keep saying that is because it expanded how many people had access to computers. Now, they weren't home-based items yet. These were high-level, like military specific machines. They were like sci-fi fancy machines that the average person did not have, definitely did not have. But what did end up happening is it went from a kind of exploratory science project that was useful within World War II to being something that was more consistently used throughout throughout the government, and also businesses that had the right sort of relationships. And of course, you have what's his name? Hollerith, Herman Hollerith, who had founded IBM and was also taking advantage of that, and created the IBM 1401, which is one of the very first machine, like digital computers that was able to expand the market for computers. So then you have the third generation, which is every couple of 10 years, it feels like. The new is in beginning of the next generation. The third generation is the 1960s to 1970s, and this is where I think computers start to be the most recognizable to what we see them as today, and radically changed how they look, how accessible they are, and what they meant to the wider population, because they went from being these kind of essentially war machines to being something you could technically have in an office or your own home. And it wasn't often in the 70s, 60s, and 70s, of course, that you would ever see someone with a computer. It was just that it radically changed the trajectory. So that was the invention of integrated circuits. And that is when you would take hundreds of transistors and pack them onto a silicone chip. And that would allow a lot higher computational power. And they were much smaller. They were super fast in comparison, and they were a lot cheaper to make. Also, because of that, it meant that you were not going to have to literally have a mass team of highly skilled operators operating the machine at all hours of the day in order for it to work. So what also developed at the same time was higher level processing and programming languages. And this is where I'm going to talk about programming languages a little bit, tiny bit. So most 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 people use a numerical system that is called base 10, where it is structured from 1 through 10, and that is the kind of groupings of how we understand numbers. Before we move on to the next, you see it in everything, but there's actually multiple different ways to group numbers. You have base 10, you have another one called base 40, and Shadow is saying, I still can't believe that the device you're watching this on is more powerful than what it took to get us to the moon, allegedly. Yeah, I know. It is absolutely incredible when you realize how, the phone that you have, any of the things. I mean, even the stuff you can get on Temu is strong, is like more powerful than what a lot of early computers were capable of. So, and Brent says, yes, a graphing calculator is more powerful than most of those computers from these eras. Yeah, for sure. They absolutely are. They absolutely are. And that again is because it takes a lot of work to essentially export the the ideas we have in our brains into a separate structure and build it into its own working machine. And it also takes time. So it doesn't surprise me fully that it took a long time to build computers, or how much work went into it. But at the same time, I think it's always important to recognize that anytime it comes to creating something that is not replicated in nature, you are going to have a lot of error, and a lot of it's going to take a lot to get very, very small amount of change and a small amount of adjustment. But that's what evolution is. Shadow says some lights are more powerful than the computers from this era. Yeah, that's very true. But they would have required so much more work so much more power to operate. One rumor is that when the ENIAC was operating, every single time it was turned on, or it had to calculate and complete a calculation, which could take days, absolute days, the lights in the neighborhood in Philadelphia where it was centered would dim, because it would the entire neighborhood, the entire area in the I guess on the same electrical circuit would be affected by how much power it took. So Diego says it's not even on the same scale. It's like the difference between 1,000,000,000 and 1,000. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It at one point, things that now seem extraordinarily everyday were absolute science fiction for people. Hi, Rusty. Hello, hello. How are you? Hello. And okay, so now we're seeing this big shift where we are going from a machine that you could probably find in, well, there's the kind of like atomic age machines of the transistor era. So basically the second and third generations are like the atomic era computers. The first generation is almost like a steampunk style computer. The third is when you get to things that are giving a little bit more modern computer. And by the IBM is again still got that chokehold on the industry. So they are able to create something called the IBM System 360, which takes over the next generation of consumers in the form of businesses and government organizations. as I guess, fans of computerized thinking. So we're on to the fourth generation. 1970s through the 1990s, we get to microprocessors. And this is where you first find Apple, Microsoft, and IBM. Well, first you see IBM getting challenged, and eventually IBM gets completely demolished by Apple and Microsoft. The company that seemed as if it was unshakable, was the only company for computers, absolutely got ripped off its throne by these two. So what the fourth generation was able to do with computer development was take the integrated circuits, which were hundreds of transistors that had been placed on a silicon chip, and or circuits of transistors packed in a silicon chip, and actually put the entire CPU on a single chip. And that's where you get the 4004 microprocessor from 1971, which was created by Intel. And this is when Intel also is fighting. You start to have this massive boom in interest for challenging the computer market and exploring and developing computers even more. There becomes a actual market for it, so it becomes a big opportunity for people to explore and financially also succeed if they are able to take the previous versions of digitized computer systems and improve upon them. Oh, Shadow says there's a couple of good videos like the history of the MacBook and other computer companies. Yes, definitely recommend. I absolutely recommend looking into this even deeper. I am doing the most bare exploration of the surface of this, because there's just so many stories, because so many people were involved in the development of the computer that it would, I think, be impossible for me to fit all of that into a live stream unless I was streaming for a very long time. So, okay. So this is when you also have the beginning of the personal computer as a possibility, as an accessible item for the general populace. Now, it's still an expensive item. A lot of people did not have computers accessible for more than like one a household if you were living large, I would say. And it wasn't, I think, until the 1990s, especially at the turn of the 2000s, that you started to have people who it was completely normal to have a computer in everyone's house, and even multiple. Yes, Brant. So the internet, I found out, was born in 1994. And that's kind of nuts to think, because for some reason I thought that it was both later and much earlier. But when you think of how much the world has changed, there's so many people who are alive, who have been alive for so much longer than the internet has ever existed. Like, can you imagine what it would be like to be like 100 years old, or even 90 years old now, and the majority of your life you did not have internet? Maybe you had computerized systems, but you definitely didn't have internet. That's nuts. And I can say that, I guess, coming from the mentality of somebody who has always had access to the internet, but I think that only just illustrates the fact that it has become such an entrenched component of our world that I really, I can't imagine how odd that would be. If you were somebody who was, say, in your mid 30s or your 40s when the internet started, or even your 20s. I mean, even then, still feel like you could adapt to it a little bit faster, but like that would just be so odd, I imagine, to me, to go from a world where there isn't an internet to a world where there is, and how much that changed human connection and communication on a grand scale. It'd be wild. Hugo says up until 10 we had no internet at all until your dad got us a modem. Wow. What was that like? I mean, you know what? I know that the internet was there. I think it was just something maybe on a personal level I didn't conceive of the same. Still, um, Shadow is saying that Wi-Fi was actually born in 1991, but it was a military-only technology. Yes, so that's the other thing about a lot of this process, a lot of this development, is so many of these major developments happened a lot earlier than the public conscious was necessarily aware of, because they were military secrets. They were concepts that were supposed to only be accessible for militarized use or high level government use. They weren't supposed to be easily accessible for the general masses. And so a lot of, there's definitely like a delay in terms of media and media response to the public perception of computers versus the reality of where they were in a developmental stage at that point. So, like, I think one of the biggest, maybe one of the bigger moments, I would say, where people really realized what like how profound and how intense computers were, was the development of, on a massive public level, was realizing how integral computers were towards space exploration, and the also massive political support that was during the Cold War for getting us into space ahead of the Russians and everybody else. Or at least that was the goal. Um, but okay, so let's see. We are at the 1990s ish, and now the what's interesting though is there's also like the fifth generation is also developing a very close tandem, which technically is from the 80s to the present, but it feels, I think it really would qualify more as like late 90s to the present, is the development of artificial intelligence. It actually starts a lot earlier than I think a lot of us realize, because I think a lot of people only really became aware of AI in a sense of our own interaction with it, I would say maybe 2020, maybe 2019. I feel like I don't remember it being as intense of a conversation in 2019 as perhaps in 2020 or 2021. Definitely like 2022 through 2024, AI was something that was, it was that awful image of, what was it, Will Smith eating fries? Y'all remember that? And it was so identifiable and so bad, and so there was all the extra fingers and other components that made it so clear that it was unreal. Whereas now, I only recently the other day saw I thought it was a trailer for Cyberpunk 2077, for the anime, for a live action version of it, and it looked so real. It looked so incredibly real. I didn't realize until the very end that it was AI, because there was something weird about the movement that I couldn't put my finger on. Like now, and this absolutely boggles my mind, is I have seen multiple creators that I thought were real people, because they have like those kind of like blurry mirror pics in their home of like them getting ready to go out for a thing, or I think they're like artists of some kind. They look, and they're not real, they're not people, they're AI. And it's like these whole characters that are developed by a team that people get invested in, and like bands that are not real but are presented as if they are real people, unless you go to um, the company's page, and it's very clear there that it's AI. But the pictures look so real. The videos look so real. It's terrifying because like the sense of it being real or AI only comes from, I guess you could say, a hyper vigilance about whether or not it is. Um, Shadow says, I googled when the first AI was made, and I was amazed with when it actually got attention. Shadow, what do you mean? When was the very first AI ever made? What did you find out? But yeah, AI has radically changed. But right, microprocessors didn't really try exactly. We talked about the individual CPU chip, and then Apple and Microsoft, and then IBM kind of holding ground and then crashing real bad. Fifth generation AI and the development of then there was also the development of further development of computerized languages, which was it was natural languages processing and parallel processing. And then it's building even further on the microprocessors and making them more efficient, smaller, and capable of handling even more data, even more high quality computations. And you start to see a massive, massive change in how people are able to connect. The internet was a huge, 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 impossible, I think, to fully define change to our world. Um, and the concept of mobile phones, mobile computers, and phones being computers was very fast. When you think about it, I mean, like, it took generations and generations. It took hundreds of years to go from like the 1830s to the 1870s. So say from Charles Babbage in the 1830s to the 19 maybe the 1970s, is that by the time we had a computer that wasn't like a room full massive item. And then for us it was the 70s to, it was like 20 years, 20, 30 years to go from that to having like computers that you can carry around. I mean, that's just a wild amount of time. 1914? How would you define the first artificial intelligence in a computerized form then? Actually, I'm curious. I want to look into this. That is so wild, Shadow. Wow. This is not okay. Okay, so the Turing test was, I remember that one was 1930s, which was the idea of, could a computer ever think for itself? And technically, I think until this day, there hasn't been any machine that has been able to pass the Turing test, not even modern AI, but I'm not 100% sure. Don't check. Brant says, with AI, it makes me wonder if the focus on STEM education will be not as essentially useful, and it would be better for people to focus on the humanities or arts. That's a good question. That's a good question. I know that on a personal level, I have my own assumptions there, and those assumptions derive 100% from experience, like personal experience. But I'm not sure how this will affect large, like other groups of people with different skill sets. 1940s, 1914 was the earliest AI ever recorded. It was an automated system to play chess. Oh, hold up, let me check in on that because that sounds so familiar. Um, oh my god, what am I doing? Numbers. Um, wow, what a cool name. Wow, that's nuts. It was a Spanish invention. It's also interesting how chess is such a consistent method of testing um, a computer's capability. If you think about it, chess and solitaire is on, and I know that that was also a marketing situation for computers, but chess and solitaire are on like every single computer when you first get them, to the degree that I don't even think anybody knows or checks anymore if it is, but like, um, no, Shadow, you're so right. You're so right. It's so wild though, because I think what you're pointing out is that there is this social perception that AI has not is a new thing that hasn't been around, but the concept of an artificial intelligence has been for a lot longer, and our attempts to realize this as has been a major component of um, human storytelling and human crisis for a long time. I mean, think about Frankenstein. I know that might not make the most direct sense, but if you think about it, Frankenstein is a story about a scientist who uses electricity and harnesses the power of electricity and the circuitry of the human body's natural system through our central nervous system to recreate or to create a living being um, that is, at least in his expectation, is supposed to be a perfectly moldable creature versus the reality where you have an independent being. And that is, I think, just as relevant to the conversation of AI as especially with the development of things like ChatGPT and Claude and all the OpenAI creations and the Anthropic's creations and the ways that people have personified and also become incredibly emotionally involved with AI programs, to the degree that it is a thing that has to be very carefully monitored now, because it's so easy and understandable within the world that we live in, where access to mental health support and community is so incredibly difficult, that people turn to AI to get the type of emotional support that is very hard to develop in your own home if you don't have a framework for it already. Nico says it's been a fixation of many great scientists, and you even had one at your university. Most of his research is AI, and he pushed a lot of people towards the field. And he was working on that for like 20 years. Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's funny. Okay, story time. I actually had a similar struggle because when I was in my final year of college, one of the big components at my school, so I studied cognitive science, which is a combination of computer science, um, cognitive psychology and neuroscience, and psycholinguistics and philosophy. So basically, philosophy, computer science, and cognitive psychology. I guess mine was a little bit more focused on neuroscience. Either way, the brain, uh, the abstract ideas of existence, and computer creation and computer structure and computers and analytical thinking, I guess. And one of the things that at the time I wanted to explore and was profoundly rejected for doing was everyone in my group had a final project where it's like your thesis. It's your final huge year-long research project, and I wanted to do mine on the whether or not AI is capable of true creativity. And in my initial, what you have to do, and I'm sure you're all familiar with this to some degree, because I know it's replicated from the time that you like kind of start your first writing assignments in schools, but I had to essentially submit an initial brief with research about my stance and what I wanted to explore and what I wanted to, you know, do my research on. And I had got so excited about doing it that I got kind of too deep in, and I was positing that AI is actually incapable of creation because most humans are incapable of complete and true creation either. So instead, what you see is what is the word? Oh my god, how am I forgetting this? Um, when oh my god, my brain. When people are taking influences and combining them to create or to composing, that's the word, composing. I was trying to argue that at that time that most humans are composers and very few are truly creative, and that they create an entirely new form of art. But it does happen, just that it happens more rarely than we often identify as creation versus composition. And AI, by default, is incapable of creation because it can only compose based off of what the programmer has allowed it to be able to do or to be able to interpret. And then from there, it can only compose based on what has already been created by others. So essentially, it cannot create, it can only compose. It can take influences from all over the world through the internet and through the also mentality of the programmer who created it and compile them into something new, but it is not a entirely new creation. I feel like that's getting a little blah blah, but essentially, um, yeah, they can put their spin on it, but it's not going to be the same as an entirely new creation. And I didn't know this, but the professor that I had, who was my thesis like mentor, I didn't know that he was working and had been working on creating an AI that could create high level music uh, processing. So he was working on creating a AI that was essentially capable of composing music that was not supposed to be fully, it was supposed to not be the like a combination of all other kinds of music, but instead a completely new piece. And he didn't like my thoughts. But at the same time, I think he was trying to, I think he was trying to make sure that I wasn't like going in with a prejudice against AI to begin with, but he also, I think, was very uncomfortable with the general thought process that I was following. Um, Brent, yeah, yeah, and I will say at the time as well, you know, it was still like right before. I mean, AI was still kind of like weird and not like because it's absolutely exploded and changed so deeply in just 3 years, and um it was definitely developed, but it wasn't like how it is like literally right now. And so I think the general idea was to try and push me into a direction that maybe had an easier process to explore. I think he was feeling like my thought process was a little too focused on difficult to quantify concepts for a scientific paper, a scientific thesis. And I totally see that. But at the same time, I definitely know how that was like, I was seeing how on all ends, every single component of every class I had was really pushing us all into AI. Like it was like I wanted to go into cognitive science because I was absolutely enamored with exploring um, music's effect on the body and the kind of experimental treatments that people were using through the study of neuroscience for um, using frequency and vibration to explore uh, different medical breakthroughs. And that was not financially, nope, it was gone. That was had been gone, and I didn't know it. I didn't know it by that point, but I definitely, I think in the process of kind of learning about AI from the mentality of, I think, a department that was very pro AI, very excited about AI, very hopeful that the graduating class would go into working in AI. And I just wasn't in that mentality. I didn't want to go in that area. Um, there was absolutely that sense of uh, why are you trying to, why are you so against this? Why are you turning your nose up at it? Was kind of the mentality that I felt. Um, and I think that one of the classes that I had was really interesting was formal logic. I failed it so bad. I failed it so bad it wasn't even funny. Um, I failed it so bad. But it was largely because as much as I tried, I definitely am not an analytical thinker. But the concept of formal logic was actually one of the very early ways that computation was even possible to develop at all, from an abacus to what we have now. So like it's it's a weird thing to see how even in these spaces where, you know, I was like in an educational environment where I was seeing this very profound desire to go into this field that maybe I had a moral question about, and at the same time also getting an opportunity to learn about some of the histories of math, the history of um, the scientific development and of history of calculation. Basically that is the history of math, but still like the steps that led us to where we got AI. And formal logic, and this was something that I had started talking about but I kind of got sidetracked earlier, is the concept of the transition from math as the kind of formulaic language that it is used for internal processing. So when you do functions, write out functions to explore representations of greater problems or like quantitative issues that you're trying to calculate. Like when you're, especially when you're trying to calculate like space related situations or statistical probabilities or things like that. Um, Ooh, yay, Shadow, please post the video that you found in the Discord. That would be great. Oh, you did. Okay. Yay, thank you so much. But um formal logic is actually a form of that was created and led to some of the very first programming languages, which was the method of using a different base number system to represent different units of numbers, and then use those representations to create code for computerized systems. So ones and zeros, binary code, as a way to represent. And that's what shifted. That was like the original big shift from like the first generation of computers to the second and the third. Like without, and it was the core component. It was simply finding better methods of using that code and then transforming those methods from a physical to a digital method. And then that transforms even more from the pure calculation and computation to representations of images on a screen, the translation of my voice through this microphone to you, or if I share something in like if I screen shared or something, you would, all of that is just like all of the things that are able to show up on our computer screens and be then transformed into mobile computers and phones, and the integration of phones and computers, and the development of social media after that. All of that is possible because of the development and shift of math, I guess, the world into binary code. And then from there, developing further forms of code to represent even more complicated concepts. And that was another class that I tried desperately to do well at, but I could not, was coding. Definitely can't code to save my life, cannot do it, will never successfully code, of that I am sure. But ultimately, what started as an abacus in 2400 BC Mesopotamia has now gotten us to AI personal assistants and robots that are autonomous and self-driving cars, which is wild. And AI is in everything from like so many more things than we recognize. I mean, it's in toasters, it's in refrigerators, it's definitely on your phone, it's on whatever you're using to watch me right now. It's but it's also, as Shadow already identified, it's been around since 1914. But in practice, it's developed rapidly in ways that are now terrifying, because you have meta glasses where people can record without you knowing. Who was it? Mark Zuckerberg had to have his security team was banned from wearing meta glasses in the courtroom that when he was in another lawsuit recently, because they were trying to record, so they could essentially stop them from recording who the jurors were and intimidating them outside of the courtroom. Like, it's absolutely nuts when you think about the fact that maybe not even like 50 years ago, none of this was a concept. None of this was possible. But this is where I kind of want to talk about the effect of computerization on pop culture and like society as a whole. So we went through a whole timeline from BCE to modern day. And in that entire timeline, one of the greater amounts of social change that happened, I think, because of computers is documented from, I would say, the 30s onwards. Not to say that there wasn't massive change socially before then. There was. And we kind of briefly discussed that a little bit earlier when we were talking about the kind of combination of how the Industrial Revolution, the exploration of circuitry and electricity radically shaped everything that changed about society, especially with the destruction of the feudalist system in Western Europe that changed into the more capitalist systems we have today, and the ways that society as a whole shifted from an agrarian focused space to a factory and production focused space. And all of that was ultimately at the same time and even affected by the slow development of computerized machine, like thinking computerized machines, and even like assembly line mentality about creation. And Grant says they don't want smart glasses in the White House either. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that's really I think really bothers me about smart glasses is the only time I could see them as being useful is if you are somebody who is being, I don't know, attacked, and you're trying to ensure you're getting evidence of the person trying to attack you. Other than that, no, because the opportunity for abuse is so incredibly strong and has already been demonstrated so many times, even though I don't think meta glasses have been around that long. One thing that also I think is very frustrating for me is that there are ways to work around any of the safety functions that were integrated. Like if you take pictures with meta glasses, I know that it's supposed to make sound, but I think there's a way to get around that. And then there's also the little light on the side that people can close, like can shut off or can hide with just some tape. And like there's such a lack of consent involved with when they're being used, because they're also pretty hard to identify unless you know what you're looking at. And I don't know if I would be able to just immediately know what meta glasses look like. I mean, even if I went and saw a picture of them, would I remember it if I was out in the world and somebody was like trying to talk to me with meta glasses and would be able to, within minutes figure out where I live? I don't think that would be great. I don't think that's the smartest idea. Because that is another development that is being questioned when it comes to meta glasses and the ways that computation has changed from being able to crunch mass amounts of numbers to being able to find people's personal information really quickly and identify them based on facial recognition. And that seems very dangerous to me. So, not a fan. Not a fan. Now, at the same time, I have definitely been seeing a rise in various influencers and people who have meta glasses who are using them to create content and just have an easier time creating things that normally take significant investment to capture and then transmit onto social media. And that's not always a negative thing. Sometimes it's very positive. But that's the thing with every form of technology, is it radically shifts the opportunity for people to be able to consent to their involvement in the content being made by someone else. I definitely feel like you saw that a lot in like the prank content of like the mid 2010s, where you had so many people who were incapable of being able to consent to being involved in a lot of videos where people would come up. Or now when you have people like, what's his name, the builder, awful, but you have streamers on Kick who are going up and doing really awful pranks to people and in public, and it's not like they're getting their consent from that person before they do it, or else the prank would be ruined. The whole idea is that you're getting an opportunity to get true audience interaction and surprise and shock and disgust on a live stream, which is very frustrating. It's very odd. But anyways, that is definitely a massive difference from where computers started. And it's also a big difference because I think that as much as there are different generations to computer development on a technological scale, I also think that there's equal generations to audience and social reaction to computer development. and it's a little bit behind on a social level what was actually capable and available because of the norm of computerized machines being used for military need for so long. But you definitely see this like catch up happen in the, I would say maybe the 80s to today, which is a very big difference in how we perceive social access. So for example, there's this movie called War Games that came out in like the mid 80s with, what's his name? Not Marty McFly. The other guy. He always reminds me of a nice mouse from a Disney movie. Matthew Broderick. Yes. Doesn't he though? He looks like a what do you call it? Yes. Yes, Brand, thank you. Ferris Bueller. Oh yeah, I've never seen that movie, but I feel like I probably should. But yeah, there was this Saint was watching it the other day, and I had seen it a while ago, and I was surprised because I was reminded again about how huge computers used to be and how much work went into them. But in media, you have another AI system. The computer is choosing to interact autonomously with a curious teen hacker who's just having fun, while it has the capability of launching like nuclear programs. And it's an, you know, it's an idea that has been explored on a media level for ages. I mean, one of the very first what was it, Metropolis was the very first movies, is about a completely like automated computerized city. When was that made? In 1927. Yeah, it was very early silent film. And yes. Okay. Brent says I need to watch Ferris Bueller. Okay, that's fair. That's very fair. I probably do. I probably do. I do, and I will. But yeah, essentially, like we've been exploring these ideas of computerized autonomous creators or machines that have their own will and their own capability for longer than and earlier than we've ever even had the concept of computers. Did say earlier, I was like, Frankenstein in a way is kind of an exploration of an AI automaton as a creature, the creature itself. But on a social level, one of I think the most easily recognizable easily recognizable representations of media when it comes to exploring how we as a populace feel about and react to technological innovation, especially due to computers, is there's a few things there's Star Trek, Star Wars, and what was that film? I think it was yeah, The Day the Earth Stood Still. I think that's the one. Let me see. I might be confusing it with a different movie, but oh yeah, okay. So that's essentially but anyways, maybe it's not that movie. There was, but either way. Oh, Terminator. That's another one where you have these like autonomous AI creatures of some kind that are that are controlled by an AI um, system that is determining the right of humanity to exist. And there's always this fear that anytime we have technological innovation, we will lead to our own demise and destruction, because ultimately we as humans will no longer be necessary. And the funny thing is, that same fear actually happened all the way back in the 1630s when was it Blaine Pascal came out with his, or was it Blaise? Blaise. Why do I keep saying his name wrong? When the Blaise Pascal, yes, when the Pascaline came out, because people were scared that it would that the there would be limited need for them to do high level computation or computation at all as humans. Um, oh, bye, Shadow. Thanks for being here. I hope you enjoyed our conversation about the topic you requested. But let's see. Yeah, so you have this my brain is going in 3 different directions. Okay, so you have this like long-standing fear that has existed anytime technology has developed or advanced. When people started using telephones or even telegrams and telephones more consistently, there was a lot of fear that the new technology would eradicate true connection between people if they weren't writing letters or needing to see each other in person the same, because you could just call them on the phone now. And why would you want to go see a person if you could call them on the phone? Like, all of these fears are replicated again and again and again every time there's technological innovation, and then that also gets represented in the media that we see. So you have these like larger than life explorations of what happens when technological innovation is supposed to hit its peak. And it's so affected by war, and it's so affected by uh, real life experiences with technology. So you have like World War II created the kind of the idealization of the atomic age, and a lot of media reflected that, and also started to reflect fears of external, like xenophobic fears of other creatures from outer space coming and invading, especially American homes, American spaces, just newness and change after a massive global conflict that displaced hundreds of thousands of millions of people and had a absolutely overwhelming effect on the entirety of how we structure our lives as a populace all over the world, because centers of power shifted and changed radically, and technology also developed intensely, and you have the computer shifting how people are able to access information in a really, really important way. And you eventually get to a point where it becomes so normalized in how people operate that you do start to see it reflected in a positive way. You start to see things like an intense excitement about space exploration, and a combination of like that kind of cowboy storytelling from like spaghetti westerns with space, what do you call it, space settings, there we go, through of course vehicles like Star Wars and the rash of movies that were coming out in the 70s. But all of those were also heavily inspired by shows that were coming out in the in the 60s, from late 50s and the 60s, from Star Trek, and the kind of invention of science fiction TV shows thanks to Lucille Ball. And you have again like machines that are created and used within those shows that don't exist, but then go on to inspire creators to continue exploring what they can do with computers until they can make those things real. Like, video calls was not so obviously something that people could do um, in the 50s up until, when was the first video call capable? I don't even know when that happened, when that started. But that idea, look this up. Oh, okay. So technically it was 1927, but definitely wasn't actually accessible until much, much later. But the average person definitely didn't have the ability to do that until 1970, which is wild. And I would even say maybe not average person, but higher level businesses that had access, again, because of the development of um, oh, because of the development of integrated circuits and CPUs to expand who had access to computers. So you have concepts that seem completely impossible and foreign even an idea to any human unless they're working in that field, suddenly being normalized through media, but through the realm of space travel and fantastical explorations of technological advancement that seems impossible. Brant says Skype, I think, was the first mainstream. Oh, yeah, yeah. Oof. Skype. FaceTime definitely made it super common, but I think that in general, like there was that's again one reason that you have like Apple and Microsoft becoming so integral to the development and changing expectations around what technology should be capable of, because they actively looked into creating items that would sell to a larger market, versus simply up until that point you had more industries or more of the research into the development of computerized systems being focused on military need, and you didn't really see it as much in external spaces. Not that it wasn't there, but it just wasn't as accessible outside of like major businesses and offices. Um, you definitely see it in the 80s when you think of like, what do you call it? Like Wall Street and stockbrokers and financiers and stuff. Like you see it in movies where all the big businesses definitely have, like the major bosses have computers, and all the way down to the cubicle workers all have computers, and they do kind of low level computations at the end of the day. They're almost more for record keeping, but the idea of having access to those things and then using them as a main social space was definitely not as integrated until the invention of the internet in the 1990s. And that radically changed who had access to what kind of information. I mean, with every step of development in this whole long timeline of how much computers have changed, media has reflected that development in more fantastical ways and in more, I guess you could even say, fear-based ways. I mean, every time there was another development in computerized capability, you would have more and more films come out that were like Terminator and a further conversation about things like AI. I mean, a lot of the like cyberpunk genre media, like Neuromancer by William Gibson, and many of the kind of seminal works that explored that, Blade Runner, were almost early warnings about what would happen if computerized systems became prioritized over human connection. And that is definitely something that we are now kind of looking back on and recognizing the importance of those messages that were being explored back in the 80s, when it still wasn't easy access for many people to have access to computers, and there wasn't even the invention of the internet up until that, like in those when those movies came out. Grant's asking, so what is the future? Where do you want to see it going? Well, okay, so here's the thing with computers that I actually think is really important. Computers aren't going anywhere, AI isn't going anywhere. But what I would love to see is a radical shift in how we utilize technology, where instead of prioritizing technology that is harmful to our environment and our populations and communities, we instead highlighted the components of technology and social media and the internet that allow for educational exchange and resource sharing and community building. It's 110 million% possible using the internet, even as it exists now. But there are so many strong financial interests in not utilizing it in a way that is actually effective or helpful for a community as a large scale. Instead, you see a lot of data centers being built that are not actually going to be helpful. You see a obsession with instituting AI systems into areas that are not needed. You see a desire to push AI into creative platforms where there's no reason for that to happen. Like, you don't need AI to replace actors. You don't need AI to replace artists. You don't need AI to replace musicians. You don't need AI to replace Instagram influencers. Like, you don't need any of that. But if we're not going to be able to have, we're not going to be able to get rid of AI now that we have it. And we have had AI for so much longer than we've been aware of. But what we can do is we can refocus how it's utilized. I also absolutely want the end of experimenting or utilizing brain organoids. That is horror to me. That is absolute horror. There is no consent involved. And if you don't know what a brain organoid is, a brain organoid is when scientists use and grow essentially the tissue from a brain, tissue to essentially create a brain tissue that is functionable. And it is then used to power I guess an artificially intelligent system. And I don't know if or how there has been much research into the into what that entails, but or not what that entails, but what the effects of that are long term. Because yes, it's a collection of cells, but it's also there's, to me, I'm not seeing any consent involved in how that happens. Even if I can't fully or properly articulate the ways that worries me, I have every bad red flag feeling that you can have when it comes to that. It just feels incredibly non-consensual. And yes, I know that it's not like it's cells, but at the same time, there's something is definitely giving me all of the worst feelings in regards to that. And it just feels very horror adjacent. It feels like a real life horror story. So I would absolutely love it if instead of pushing to create more of a hyperfixation and focus and reliance on systems that are actively causing harm to many, many communities and the earth, we instead refocused and invested in healthier systems and utilized the internet and computerized systems in a way that actually encourages medical development and the encouraging ecological development. There's so many different ways that you can use the creations that we have made, the developments we've made on a technological level for those things. It's just like we identified earlier when it came to technological innovation in the face of war. Unless there is a negative conflict that is financially, I think, an issue for certain groups of people, there is often minimal interest in concentrating resources in a way that allows the type of technological innovation that does support mass amounts of people. Gecko says, this is a problem with capitalism as a whole. The system pushes for more money rather than the good of the people. Many times they align, but not always. 110%. Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. But yeah, I think in general, when it comes to this entire subject, it's really, really important to understand the nuances of development and how computers got from wooden beads on a string to a fully autonomous AI system. Hi, Riley. Oh, thank you, thank you. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry because I think I'm actually winding down. I'm getting to the end. Um, I'm so sorry, but I um I know this has been a super meandering stream. Um, Largely, I think because even though I have notes, I'm trying to keep track of a lot of different information and also make sure I'm actually presenting it accurately. But regardless, I feel like all of the different things I touched on you could go so much deeper. And I think that if, there's definitely, I think, components of what I've discussed throughout today's stream that could be an entire stream in of themselves. I think if we wanted to explore not like unexpected representations of AI in media, I would love that. That'd be really fun. We could definitely do that. If we wanted to explore ways that computers changed social norms before we understood them as computers, like 1800s era, analytical engines era, I think there would be a lot to look into there as well. I'd be really interested to explore the intersection of the Industrial Revolution, circuitry, and the development of computers and how that affected social norms and media especially. Oh, good. Riley, I love that. Craft nights are awesome. I love craft nights. And that might be a good thing to be doing all together as well. We should definitely do craft night sometime as well. But again, like I said, there are so many different components to explore just within this conversation here. And I think that a lot of media does do a beautiful job exploring how this might look in the future and has already explored what could or could not happen based on different eras' understanding of how technology works. I think ever since the, Solaris in the 1970s and earlier, Space Odyssey is another really good one. There's been a lot of fear about how technology overpaces and overtakes and outpaces human control. And I am very curious when it comes to exploring what would happen if we shifted that mindset from control to something else. Because I think there's, again, so many different ways we can go even deeper in this conversation. And I'd love to know if you have any particular curiosities that you'd like me to explore. I would like to. I definitely know that when it comes to trying to cover as much as this topic has within it, it's kind of tough, but I also I want to go deeper if you're interested. So I will definitely be doing that on a future stream. Um, I am obviously still working on my my video. Oh god, it takes so much work, but I will hopefully get that up very soon. And then I will be seeing you all again on oh, we have a watch party on Discord. Either I think Sunday or Monday, possibly Sunday, but yes. And then, of course, we also have next week's topic. If there is a particular topic you want me to explore, I can either continue exploring this and the intersections that I discussed just a few minutes ago, or we can go into something completely different. There's an infinite amount of topics to explore. So, if you're curious about any particular questions or just want to explore something in the future, just let me know in the comments or let me know in Discord. And I will see you all again very soon. So, thanks so much for jumping in for today's stream. I know that it was a little meandering, and I really just appreciate all of the questions and the really interesting dialogue that we got to have today. So, yeah, if you haven't yet, don't forget to subscribe if you are new. But yeah. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Ah, thank you so much, Kiko. Yay. It's kind of, I don't know why birthdays, I keep forgetting that they are happening and that they happen. But yeah, I guess I only have a few hours until my birthday because I don't know what time I was born. But I will see you all soon. Thank you so much for the birthday wishes and have a safe and good night, everyone.